Okay, so this is part 2 of our chapter 2 narrated PowerPoints. This is about the television series. The television series was developed based on the popularity of radio series, stories on the radio that people would listen to every week, for example, and they would continue. Literature obviously has lots of series. You probably read a lot of those when you were younger. Tarzan, The Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and theatrical films even created series. Freddy Krueger, Tarzan, Nightmare on Elm Street, beginning in 1984, Rocky, beginning in 1976, superheroes, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, are all examples of series, stories that keep continuing with the same characters and the same types of situations. So there's a lot of historical references that the television series picked up on and developed on its own. So here's some narrative elements, and think about how these are different. You can compare in your notes as you're taking notes on this as to how the narrative elements are different from the theatrical film. You have multiple protagonists, not just one, as in the classic example of Indiana Jones. You have lots of different characters, maybe not lots, but more than one, that you tend to follow through the series. It would get kind of boring if there was only one week after week after week. You have the exposition is a little bit different. It's a little briefer because it's been developed over so much time, so they're not going to reestablish the character every single time you view the show. It's going to rely on previous weeks. Only new characters would have more extended exposition, and if they go to a new location, they might spend a little bit more time establishing that location. You're going to have more infrequent references to the past, which just makes sense. So for the example, some of the clips you can watch as well that are posted on D2L here are from Friends. In the exposition of a Friends episode, the show ran for over 10 years, Rachel asks Joey for key narrative information, which he cannot provide. So the exposition kind of helps build the suspense of and remind people what happened before. More Friends exposition, you have a secondary storyline develops between Monica and Chandler. So they're starting to establish that. They might refer to, how their relationship started, but they're going to keep it going. So it's going to be very brief. So other narrative elements of the series, motivation. The lack or desire of the protagonist sparks the story, and the desire of one protagonist may dominate one week, whereas the desire of another may arise in the next episode. So it's not followed through all the way to the end. The motivation might be developed, but it's going to be slow and gradual. It's going to constantly develop over the course of the series, but it's not necessarily going to just stay with that one thing that they need to get. Another element of a series is the narrative problematic structure. This basically means that a narrative kernel recurs every week. You talk about the enigma of the television, of the theatrical film, a question that needs to be answered. It's going to recur every week. However, it's going to basically be solved every week as well. So a dilemma that the show solves in every episode. For example, in Friends, the primary recurring dilemma or narrative problematic is, will the friends' camaraderie be disrupted? That is an underlying problem that is continually addressed in every single episode. Okay? So the basic problematic of the series, with all its conflicts, is itself a stable state. And if that question is ever answered, you're pretty much done with the series. And when a series knows that it's going to end, it's going to build towards the end of that question. But it's going to keep that question going throughout the series. So you have also a cause and effect chain, just like you do in a film, but it's built scene by scene, and it's not as continuous as a classical narrative like in the film. However, the chain must be broken for the insertion of commercials. So you've got little acts that are usually about 7 or 8 minutes long between commercial segments. And there's a small climax at the end of each act. There's kind of a breaking point or some dramatic pause that happens right before the commercial. And you can see why this is a lot more structured than it would be in a film, because it's every 7 or 8 minutes. So here's an example from Friends. Everybody has just discovered that Ross is dating Janice, and so he looks guilty during the instant before a commercial break. So that question has been answered, that climactic moment has been sealed, and then after the commercial, everyone stares at him the instant right after. So we cut back to trying to resolve whatever that climax was. Okay, so let's talk about the climax a little bit more. It's a little bit more undercut by the repeatability of the program. So you can't have this big, huge, dramatic climax and then what do, right? Then the program kind of ends. So you need to keep it kind of going the whole time. Its need to return the following week with the same problematic. So you can't necessarily answer it or complete it totally. The resolution or denouement is that there is no final resolution. There is no full narrative closure until the very last episode of that series, like I said. And as you may have noticed, some series get canceled before they have a chance to develop that resolution, and then the audience is kind of left hanging. Like, I can't believe they canceled that show and they never resolved it. That can be pretty tragic to the popularity of the show, but hopefully the series knows when it's going to be ended so that it can write this into the story. But again, it doesn't come, until the very, very end of the series, which could be years. So, for example, the final shot in this particular episode of Friends is before the end credits opens the possibility of a union between Joey and Janice. So again, there was a climactic moment, it was resolved, but then the problem continues with another character. So you've got, again, multiple protagonists. You've got the narrative problematic, how is their camaraderie affected by outside forces, and you've got the underlying question of what's going to happen to each particular protagonist. That's going to keep going. So that is the main differences between the television film and the television series. Next PowerPoint you're going to watch is about the serial, and so you'll see how that's different. So that's the end of this presentation.